The scream echoed down the marble stairwell of Hayes Construction, a sound so raw and desperate it seemed to shatter the polished corporate silence. Blood pooled on white stone steps, crimson drops marking each point of impact like a grotesque countdown. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. 2 hours earlier, Rebecca Morgan had been humming softly in her kitchen, carefully packing Jonathan's favorite sandwich into an insulated bag. At 7 months pregnant, her movements were slower now, more deliberate, but she'd wanted to surprise her husband with lunch. The morning sickness had finally passed, and she felt almost like herself again. "Maybe we can talk about baby names," she'd whispered to her growing belly, smoothing her hands over the soft cotton of her maternity dress. "Daddy's been so busy with work lately, but he'll love this surprise." The drive to Hayes Construction took 20 minutes through downtown traffic. Rebecca had called ahead to Jonathan's secretary, making sure he'd be free for lunch. "Oh, Mr. Hayes is in his private conference room," the young woman had said, "but I'm sure he won't mind the interruption for his beautiful wife." Rebecca smiled at the memory as she stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 20th floor. The building still impressed her after 4 years of marriage. Jonathan had built his construction company from nothing, turning it into a multi-million-dollar empire. She was proud of him, even if his success meant longer hours and more time apart. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the executive floor. Rebecca walked down the familiar hallway, past framed photos of Jonathan's construction projects, hotels, office buildings, shopping centers, all testament to her husband's vision and drive. His corner office door stood slightly ajar. She could hear voices inside. Jonathan's deep laugh mixed with something higher, more musical. Female laughter. Rebecca paused outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle. Jonathan often met with female clients and employees. There was nothing unusual about that, but something in the quality of that laughter made her stomach tighten. She pushed the door open gently. The lunch bag slipped from Rebecca's fingers, hitting the expensive carpet with a soft thud. Salad containers burst open, scattering mixed greens and cherry tomatoes across the Persian rug. Jonathan stood behind his massive mahogany desk, hastily adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. His face was flushed, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Beside him, Vanessa Cole smoothed down her silk blouse with practiced efficiency. Jonathan's executive assistant looked completely composed except for her slightly swollen lips and the satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. She was beautiful in that sharp, predatory way that Rebecca had always secretly envied. All angles and confidence where Rebecca was soft curves and gentle nature. "Rebecca," Jonathan stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. "I didn't expect you. We were just reviewing the quarterly reports." Vanessa's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, did we forget to lock the door?" She made no effort to hide her amusement at Rebecca's shock. "How clumsy of us." Rebecca couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely, as if someone had wrapped invisible hands around her neck. She stared at her husband, searching his face for some explanation that would make sense of what she was seeing. But Jonathan couldn't meet her eyes. The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if sensing her distress. The sharp movement broke through her paralysis. "I brought you lunch," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. Jonathan took a step toward her, his hands outstretched. "Rebecca, please, let me explain." But Rebecca was already backing away, her pregnant body moving with surprising speed toward the door. She had to get out, had to breathe, had to think. The hallway seemed endless as she stumbled toward the stairwell, her flat shoes slipping slightly on the polished marble floor. Behind her, she could hear Jonathan calling her name, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Rebecca pushed through the heavy stairwell door, grateful for the cooler air and the escape from curious eyes. The emergency stairs were rarely used by executives. Most people took the elevator. She just needed a moment to collect herself, to figure out what to do next. Her hands shook as she gripped the metal railing. 7 months pregnant, and her husband was having an affair with his assistant. How long had it been going on? How many signs had she missed? How many late nights and business trips had been lies? The stairwell door opened behind her. "Rebecca, wait." But it wasn't Jonathan's voice. Vanessa Cole stood in the doorway, her expression no longer amused but coldly calculating. She'd reapplied her lipstick and fixed her hair. She looked perfect again, untouchable. "We need to talk," Vanessa said, stepping into the stairwell and letting the door close behind her with a solid click. Rebecca turned to face her husband's mistress, her back pressed against the concrete wall. "I don't think we have anything to discuss." Vanessa's smile was razor sharp. "Oh, but we do. You see, what you walked in on today? That wasn't some meaningless fling. Jonathan and I have been together for 8 months now. He's going to leave you." The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. 8 months. That meant the affair had started before she got pregnant. Before they'd celebrated the positive pregnancy test with champagne and tears of joy. Before Jonathan had rubbed her feet during morning sickness and assembled the crib with such careful attention. "You're lying," Rebecca managed. But even as she said it, she could see the truth in Vanessa's eyes. "Am I? Ask him about the weekend in Chicago last month. Ask him about the jewelry he bought me for my birthday. Ask him why he's been pulling away from you. Why he barely touches you anymore." Vanessa took another step closer. "He doesn't love you anymore, Rebecca. That baby won't save your marriage. If anything, it's driving him further away." Rebecca felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of this woman. Jonathan would never abandon his child. "No, he won't abandon the child, but he doesn't want to be married to you anymore. He's just been too much of a coward to tell you." Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper. "But I'm not a coward." "Nay." Rebecca turned away, unable to bear looking at Vanessa's triumphant expression any longer. She needed to get home, needed to call her brother Michael, needed to figure out how her perfect life had crumbled in the span of 10 minutes. "Don't turn your back on me," Vanessa snapped, her composure finally cracking. "I'm not finished talking to you." "Yes, you are," Rebecca said quietly, starting down the stairs. "This conversation is over." She felt Vanessa's hands between her shoulder blades before she saw them coming. The push wasn't violent. Vanessa was too smart for that, but it was perfectly placed and timed. Rebecca's pregnant body, already off balance, had no chance to recover. The world tilted sideways. Rebecca's hands flew out instinctively to protect her belly as she tumbled backward down the concrete steps. Her right shoulder hit first, sending electric pain shooting down her arm. Then her hip, her back, each impact jarring through her body like a series of explosions. She counted 12 steps as she fell, each one marking another moment of terror for her unborn daughter. When she finally came to rest on the landing, Rebecca's vision was gray around the edges, and she could taste blood in her mouth. Above her, Vanessa was already pulling out her cell phone, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine shock. "Oh my God, Rebecca, are you okay? Someone call 911. She just fell down the stairs." Rebecca tried to speak, tried to tell the truth about what had really happened, but darkness was creeping in from all sides. The last thing she remembered was the sound of sirens growing louder and the desperate flutter of her baby's heartbeat against her ribs. The fall had lasted less than 30 seconds, but Rebecca Morgan's life as she knew it was over. The first thing Rebecca heard was the steady beeping of hospital monitors. The second was her husband's voice, strained and unfamiliar, speaking in hushed tones somewhere near her feet. "I don't understand how this could have happened. Rebecca's always been so careful, especially since she got pregnant. She's paranoid about falling, won't even wear heels anymore." Rebecca kept her eyes closed, letting consciousness return slowly. Her body felt like she'd been hit by a truck, which she supposed wasn't far from the truth. Her right shoulder was immobilized in a sling, and there was a persistent ache in her lower back that made her breath catch. "But the baby, please let the baby be okay." "Mr. Hayes?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, your wife's obstetrician. I've been monitoring both Rebecca and the baby since she arrived." "And?" Jonathan's voice cracked with genuine fear. "The baby is stable, strong heartbeat, good movement. Rebecca has a dislocated shoulder, several deep bruises, and a mild concussion. She's very lucky the fall wasn't worse." Rebecca finally opened her eyes, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lighting. Jonathan stood at the foot of her hospital bed, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face pale with worry. For a moment, seeing his obvious distress, she almost forgot about the scene in his office. Then Vanessa Cole appeared in the doorway, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing an expression of such convincing concern that Rebecca wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. "Oh, Rebecca," Vanessa breathed, hurrying to the bedside. "I feel so terrible about what happened. One minute we were talking in the stairwell, and the next you were falling. I tried to catch you, but it happened so fast." The lie was delivered with perfect sincerity. Vanessa even managed to produce tears that sparkled prettily in the hospital lighting. Rebecca stared at her husband's mistress in amazement. The woman was a master performer. "You were in the stairwell?" Dr. Mitchell asked, making notes on Rebecca's chart. Did Rebecca seem dizzy or disoriented before she fell? Pregnant women sometimes experience blood pressure drops that can cause fainting. "She seemed upset about something," Vanessa said carefully. "She was crying and not really paying attention to where she was going. I was trying to help her calm down." Another lie, smooth as silk. Rebecca opened her mouth to correct the story, but Jonathan was already nodding. "Rebecca's been emotional lately," he said, not meeting his wife's eyes. "Pregnancy hormones, stress about the baby coming, she's been having crying spells." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. Jonathan was corroborating Vanessa's version of events without even realizing it. Or maybe he was realizing it. Maybe this was his way of protecting his mistress. "That's not what happened," Rebecca said quietly, finding her voice at last. All three adults turned to look at her. Jonathan's face lit up with relief that she was conscious and talking. Dr. Mitchell moved closer to check her pupils with a small flashlight. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. A warning. "Rebecca, honey, you hit your head pretty hard," Jonathan said gently. "You might not remember everything clearly." "I remember perfectly." Rebecca looked directly at Vanessa. "I remember our conversation, all of it." Vanessa's performance didn't waver. "She was so upset about walking in on that client meeting," she said to Jonathan, as if Rebecca weren't lying right there. "I think she misunderstood what she saw." The audacity was breathtaking. Vanessa was rewriting history in real time, turning their affair into an innocent business meeting and Rebecca's discovery into pregnancy-induced paranoia. Before Rebecca could respond, the hospital room door burst open and her brother Michael strode in, still wearing his police uniform. Detective Captain Michael Morgan was an imposing figure under normal circumstances. 6 feet 2 inches of solid muscle and unwavering authority. But when he was worried about his little sister, he became a force of nature. "Rebecca." His voice was rough with emotion as he took in her bandaged appearance. "Jesus, what happened to you?" Jonathan stepped forward, extending his hand in greeting. "Michael, I'm so glad you're here. Rebecca had an accident at my office building. She fell down a flight of stairs." Michael ignored Jonathan's outstretched hand, his trained eye already cataloging his sister's injuries. The defensive bruising on her forearms, the way she was favoring her left side, the barely concealed fear in her eyes when she glanced at the blonde woman standing beside her flowers. "Fell downstairs," Michael repeated slowly. "How exactly does a woman who's been walking perfectly fine her entire life suddenly fall downstairs?" "Pregnancy can affect balance," Dr. Mitchell offered diplomatically. "Blood pressure changes, weight distribution, hormonal fluctuations." But Michael wasn't looking at the doctor. He was studying his sister's face, reading the subtle signals they'd developed as children. Rebecca's slight headshake, the way her eyes darted toward Vanessa and back, the careful neutrality of her expression that meant she was hiding something important. "I'd like to speak with Rebecca alone," Michael said. It wasn't a request. Vanessa stepped forward smoothly. "Of course. Jonathan and I should probably get back to the office anyway. There are so many things to take care of after an incident like this. Insurance paperwork, safety reviews." The casual way she linked herself with Jonathan, speaking as if they were a unit, made Rebecca's stomach turn. But Jonathan didn't seem to notice. He was focused on his wife, his guilt and worry written plainly across his face. "I'll be back tonight," he promised Rebecca, leaning down to kiss her forehead awkwardly around the hospital equipment. "Try to get some rest." After Jonathan and Vanessa left, Dr. Mitchell excused herself to check on other patients. Finally alone with her brother, Rebecca felt the careful composure she'd been maintaining start to crack. "Michael, she whispered, and the single word carried the weight of everything she couldn't say out loud. He was beside her in an instant, careful not to jostle her injured shoulder as he took her left hand. "Tell me what really happened, Becca." The childhood nickname undid her completely. Rebecca started crying, ugly, wrenching sobs that made her ribs ache, but felt like the first honest thing that had happened since she'd opened Jonathan's office door. "She pushed me," Rebecca managed between gasps. "Jonathan's having an affair with his assistant, and when I found out, she followed me into the stairwell and pushed me down the stairs." Michael's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Rebecca had seen that expression before, usually right before her brother arrested someone for domestic violence. "Are you certain? Head injuries can sometimes cause confusion." "I'm certain. She told me they've been together for 8 months. She said Jonathan doesn't love me anymore, that the baby won't save our marriage. When I tried to leave, she pushed me." Rebecca gripped her brother's hand tighter. "But Michael, you can't arrest her. Not yet." "The hell I can't. Please, I need to think about what's best for the baby. If Jonathan's really planning to leave me, if he's really been lying to me for 8 months, I need to figure out my next steps. I can't make decisions from a hospital bed while I'm drugged and confused." Michael studied her face for a long moment. Rebecca could see him warring between his protective instincts and his respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded grimly. 48 hours, he said. "I'll give you 48 hours to decide how you want to handle this. But Becca, if that woman hurt you and your baby, she's going to pay for it. That's a promise." As if summoned by their conversation, Nurse Amy Thompson appeared in the doorway. She was young, probably not much older than Vanessa, but her expression was troubled. "Detective Morgan, I was hoping I could speak with you privately." Michael glanced at Rebecca, who nodded her permission. They stepped into the hallway, but Rebecca could hear their whispered conversation through the partially open door. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," the nurse said nervously, "but I was on duty when your sister was brought in. The paramedics said there was security footage from the office building across the street. The camera angle apparently caught part of what happened in that stairwell." Rebecca's heart stopped. Security footage. Evidence of what Vanessa had really done. "Where's this footage now?" Michael asked, his voice carefully controlled. "I don't know, but the building manager mentioned it to one of the EMTs, said he'd been reviewing it to see if he could figure out what happened." When Michael returned to Rebecca's room, his expression was grim but determined. "Change of plans, little sister. We're not waiting 48 hours. "Michael, I told you." "There's security footage, Becca. Video evidence of what happened in that stairwell, which means this isn't just your word against hers anymore." He squeezed her hand gently. "Which also means that woman isn't going to get away with trying to hurt you and your baby." Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and terror wash over her. Part of her had been afraid that no one would believe her story. Pregnant women were often dismissed as emotional or unstable, their concerns written off as hormonal overreactions. But video evidence was undeniable. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I go watch that footage, and then I decide whether Vanessa Cole gets arrested for assault or attempted murder." The casual way he said it made Rebecca shiver. Michael had always been protective of her, but she'd never seen him this coldly furious. Vanessa Cole had made a dangerous enemy. "Be careful," Rebecca warned. "She's smart, Michael, and she's been planning this for months. She knows exactly what she's doing." Michael's smile was sharp as a blade. "So do I, little sister. So do I." After he left, Rebecca lay in the hospital bed listening to her baby's heartbeat on the monitor and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been a happily married woman preparing for her first child. Now she was an assault victim whose husband was having an affair and whose life was falling apart in real time. But she was alive. Her baby was alive. And for the first time since she'd tumbled down those concrete steps, Rebecca Morgan felt something stronger than fear or betrayal. She felt angry, and anger, she was beginning to realize, might just be the thing that saved her. Michael Morgan sat alone in his police station office at 11:30 that night, watching security footage on his computer screen for the 4th time. Each viewing made his hands shake a little more with barely controlled rage. The camera angle was perfect. Crystal clear view of the stairwell landing from the office building across the street. Rebecca appeared first. moving slowly down the steps with her hand on the railing, clearly upset but careful. Then Vanessa Cole entered the frame, following Rebecca with predatory purpose. The conversation wasn't audible, but body language told the story clearly enough. Vanessa advancing, Rebecca retreating. Vanessa's gestures becoming more aggressive, Rebecca trying to disengage. And then, when Rebecca turned to leave, Vanessa's hands making deliberate contact with Rebecca's shoulders. The push itself looked almost casual. 2 hands placed between Rebecca's shoulder blades, a quick shove forward. But Michael had investigated enough domestic violence cases to recognize the calculated nature of the movement. Vanessa had chosen her moment perfectly, waiting until Rebecca was off balance and vulnerable. Watching his pregnant sister tumble down those concrete steps made Michael feel murderous. He'd promised their dying mother he would always protect Rebecca. He'd failed once today. He wouldn't fail again. His phone buzzed with a text from Detective Frank Rivera, his longtime partner. Got the arrest warrant. Assault in the 2nd degree. You sure you don't want me to handle this one? Michael typed back quickly. I'm sure. Meet me at Hayes Construction at 7 a.m. He leaned back in his chair, remembering another hospital room 20 years earlier. Their father had been dying of cancer, and 8-year-old Rebecca had climbed into the narrow hospital bed to curl up against his side. Michael's going to take care of you now, sweetheart, their father had whispered, his voice already weak from the morphine. He's your big brother. That's his job. But who's going to take care of Michael? Rebecca had asked in her small, serious voice. Their father had smiled, the last real smile Michael ever saw from him. You are, baby girl. You're going to take care of each other. And they had. Through their mother's long illness and eventual death when Rebecca was 16, through Michael's police academy training and Rebecca's college years, through her marriage to Jonathan Hayes, which Michael had supported despite his reservations about the man. Jonathan had always seemed weak to Michael, too concerned with appearances, too easily influenced by his domineering mother. But Rebecca had loved him, and Jonathan had seemed to genuinely care for her, so Michael had kept his opinions to himself. Now he wished he'd spoken up. Maybe if he'd voiced his concerns earlier, Rebecca would have seen through Jonathan's charm. Maybe she would have noticed the signs of his affair before it was too late. Michael's computer chimed with an email from the prosecutor's office. The arrest warrant was officially approved. Vanessa Cole would be in custody by 8 a.m. tomorrow. He was reviewing the charges when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Jonathan's number. Michael, thank God you answered. I've been trying to reach you all evening. What do you want, Jonathan? I want to know what the hell is going on. I just got a call from my company's security office. They said police requested footage from yesterday's incident. What kind of footage? Why wasn't I notified? Michael's voice was ice cold. The kind of footage that shows your mistress pushing my pregnant sister down a flight of stairs. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Jonathan's voice, and smaller now. Michael, you don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. You've been having an affair with your assistant for 8 months. Rebecca found out yesterday, and when she tried to leave, Vanessa assaulted her. I have it all on video. Video? Jonathan's voice cracked. That's impossible. Vanessa said Rebecca just fell. She was trying to help her. Vanessa lied. She's been lying to you too. Probably about a lot of things. But I guess you're used to being lied to, since you've been doing plenty of lying yourself. Michael could hear Jonathan's rapid breathing through the phone. Look, I know I screwed up with the affair. I know I hurt Rebecca. But Vanessa would never deliberately hurt anyone. She's not violent. She pushed a pregnant woman down concrete stairs, Jonathan. That's not just violent, it's attempted murder. And you know what? You're just as responsible as she is. That's not fair, isn't it? You created this situation. You brought that woman into your wife's life. You gave her access to Rebecca, opportunity to hurt her. And when your affair was discovered, your mistress decided to eliminate the competition permanently. The line went quiet for so long that Michael thought Jonathan had hung up. Finally, his brother-in-law's voice came through, broken and defeated. What happens now? Now Vanessa Cole gets arrested for assault. What happens after that depends on Rebecca. Can I see the footage? No. Michael, please. I need to understand what really happened. And what you want to understand? Here's what you need to understand. Tomorrow morning, I'm arresting the woman you've been sleeping with for trying to kill my sister. You're married to Rebecca Morgan, which makes you my brother-in-law. That used to mean something to me, but you've forgotten what family loyalty looks like." Michael hung up without waiting for a response. He had an arrest to prepare for. At Hayes Construction the next morning, Michael and Detective Rivera arrived with backup officers and a warrant. The receptionist tried to call upstairs to warn Vanessa, but Michael flashed his badge and stopped her. "This is official police business. No phone calls." They found Vanessa at her desk outside Jonathan's office, looking perfectly composed in a tailored navy suit. She even smiled when she saw Michael approaching. "Detective Morgan, what a surprise. How is Rebecca feeling today?" "Vanessa Cole, you're under arrest for assault in the second degree." "Shunni." Michael's voice carried across the entire office floor. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. "You have the right to remain silent." Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong. Rebecca fell down the stairs. I tried to help her." Michael continued reading her rights while Rivera produced handcuffs. Vanessa's voice rose as the reality of the situation hit her. "You can't arrest me for this. I'm a victim here too." "Jonathan, tell them. Jonathan." Jonathan emerged from his office just as Rivera was cuffing Vanessa's hands behind her back. His face was gray with shock and disbelief. "What's happening?" he asked, though he clearly already knew. "Your mistress is being arrested for assaulting my pregnant sister," Michael said loudly enough for everyone on the floor to hear. "Apparently she didn't appreciate Rebecca discovering your 8-month affair." The words hit the office like a bomb. Jonathan's employees stared openly now, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Jonathan's affair was no longer a secret. His reputation, both personal and professional, was being destroyed in real time. Vanessa's mask finally slipped completely. "You bastard!" she screamed at Jonathan as Rivera led her toward the elevator. "You promised me you were going to leave her. You said we'd be together. You said you loved me." Jonathan stood frozen as his mistress revealed the depth of their relationship in front of his entire staff. Every promise he'd made to Vanessa, every lie he'd told Rebecca, was being aired for everyone to hear. 8 months, Michael repeated, making sure everyone understood the timeline. "Your affair started before your wife got pregnant, didn't it, Jonathan?" Jonathan couldn't answer, couldn't look at anyone. He stood in the wreckage of his professional life while his personal life crumbled around him. As the elevator doors closed on Vanessa's still screaming form, Michael turned to address the watching employees. "If anyone here witnessed anything related to this incident, I encourage you to contact the police department. Assault on a pregnant woman is a serious crime, and we want to make sure we have all the facts." He left Jonathan standing alone in his office, surrounded by employees who now knew exactly what kind of man their boss really was. The arrest made the local news by noon. "Construction company executive's mistress arrested for assault on pregnant wife" ran as the lead story. Hayes Construction's stock price began dropping immediately. By the time Michael returned to the hospital to update Rebecca, the story was everywhere. Social media, local news websites, even the gossip blogs had picked it up. Jonathan Hayes, once respected businessman, was now the subject of public scandal. "How do you feel about it?" Michael asked his sister, who was sitting up in bed looking significantly better than she had the day before. "Vindicated," Rebecca said simply, and terrified. "Jonathan's going to lose everything over this, isn't he?" "Probably, but that's his choice, Becca. He created this mess. You didn't." Rebecca nodded slowly, her hand resting on her belly where the baby was moving actively. "I keep thinking about what Vanessa said, about Jonathan not loving me anymore, about the baby not being able to save our marriage. What if she was telling the truth about that part? Then you'll figure out how to build a new life. But Becca, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and you can't love someone enough for both of you." The words hit home. Rebecca had been trying to love Jonathan enough for both of them for months, making excuses for his distance, his late nights, his emotional unavailability. She'd convinced herself that once the baby came, everything would go back to normal. But normal had been a lie. Normal had been her husband having an affair while she planned their future and grew their child. "I want to see the security footage," Rebecca said suddenly. "Becca, that's not a good idea. You don't need to relive it." "Yes, I do. I need to see exactly what happened so I can stop second-guessing myself. I need to see the truth. Michael studied his sister's face. Rebecca had always been the gentler of the two Morgan siblings, more inclined toward forgiveness and understanding. But there was something different in her expression now, something harder and more determined. All right, he said finally, but we watch it together, and if it gets too difficult, we stop. Rebecca nodded. She was done being protected from difficult truths. It was time to face reality, no matter how painful it might be. Because the woman who had fallen down those stairs yesterday was gone forever. The woman sitting in this hospital bed was someone new, someone stronger, someone who refused to be a victim anymore. The interrogation room at the county police station was deliberately unremarkable. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor. Vanessa Cole sat across from Michael and Detective Rivera, her expensive suit wrinkled from spending the night in a holding cell. Her lawyer, a sharp-faced man in his 50s, kept checking his watch impatiently. My client maintains her innocence, the lawyer said for the third time. Mrs. Hayes fell down the stairs. Ms. Cole attempted to help her. This arrest is harassment based on family bias. Michael slid a tablet across the table, the security footage already queued up. Your client can maintain whatever she wants, but this video tells a different story. Vanessa's face went pale as she watched herself push Rebecca down the stairs. The footage was damning, crystal clear evidence of deliberate assault. Her lawyer's expression shifted from confident to concern. The angle is misleading, Vanessa said weakly. I was trying to steady her. She was acting erratically, threatening to hurt herself and the baby. Really? Rivera leaned forward. Because the audio from your cell phone tells a different story. Vanessa's lawyer straightened. What audio? Your client made 17 phone calls in the hour following the incident. We have warrants for all of them. Rivera opened a file folder. Would you like to hear the one where she called her sister and said, and I quote, "That stupid pregnant bitch finally got what was coming to her"? The room went silent. Vanessa's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Or maybe, Michael continued, you'd prefer the voicemail she left for Jonathan Hayes where she said she'd taken care of the Rebecca problem and he didn't need to worry about his wife interfering anymore. Vanessa's lawyer was frantically taking notes now, realizing his client had made his job nearly impossible. I need to speak with my client privately. Take all the time you need, Michael said, standing, but we have enough evidence to charge attempted murder instead of simple assault. Pushing a pregnant woman down concrete stairs with intent to cause serious bodily harm? That plays very badly with juries. As they left Vanessa to confer with her lawyer, Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. I need to talk to you. It's important. Michael ignored it. Jonathan Hayes had burned through whatever goodwill remained between them. Back at the hospital, Rebecca was being discharged into Grace Coleman's care. Her best friend and neighbor had arrived that morning with a suitcase and a fierce expression that reminded Michael of a protective mama bear. She's staying with me until she figures out what she wants to do, Grace announced, helping Rebecca into a wheelchair despite the hospital's protests that she could walk. My guest room is ready, and I've already child-proofed the house for when the baby comes. Grace Coleman was the kind of friend every woman needed, loyal to the bone, unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths, and absolutely ruthless when someone threatened her people. She'd been Rebecca's college roommate and maid of honor, and she'd never particularly liked Jonathan. I tried to warn you about him, Grace muttered as she pushed Rebecca's wheelchair toward the hospital exit. Rich boy with mommy issues and a wandering eye. But did you listen? No. Grace, Rebecca said tiredly. I'm just saying. My gaydar includes cheating bastard dar, and that man pinged every alarm I had. Despite everything, Rebecca found herself smiling. Grace's complete lack of filter was oddly comforting. At least someone was saying out loud what everyone else was thinking. As they reached Grace's car, Jonathan appeared from the parking garage looking haggard and desperate. He'd obviously been waiting for Rebecca to be discharged. Rebecca, please, I need to talk to you. Grace stepped between them like a bodyguard. She doesn't need to talk to you. Grace, it's okay, Rebecca said quietly. 5 minutes, Jonathan. That's all. They moved a few steps away from Grace's protective presence, but not far enough that Michael couldn't intervene if necessary. Jonathan looked terrible, unshaven, his usually perfect hair messy, his clothes rumpled. I'm so sorry, he began. his voice breaking. About the affair, about Vanessa, about everything. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, Rebecca replied calmly. 8 months, Jonathan. 8 months you were lying to me while I was planning our future and growing your child. It meant nothing. Vanessa was she was available, and I was stressed about the business, about becoming a father, about everything changing. It was stupid and selfish, but it wasn't love. Rebecca studied her husband's face. She could see genuine remorse there, real anguish over what he'd lost. But she could also see the same weakness that had led him to cheat in the first place. The need to be wanted, the inability to resist easy temptation, the assumption that he could have everything without consequences. What did you promise her, Jonathan? He flinched. What do you mean? Vanessa screamed in your office that you promised to leave me, that you said you loved her. What exactly did you promise her to keep her quiet for 8 months? Jonathan couldn't meet her eyes. I may have implied that things between us weren't working, that I was thinking about ending our marriage. Implied? How thoughtful. Rebecca's voice was steady, but Michael could hear the steel beneath it. So you let your mistress believe she was going to be your wife, while you let me believe I was building a life with a man who loved me. Very efficient. Rebecca, please. I know I screwed up everything, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through this. Think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby. I'm thinking about what kind of example I want to set for our daughter. I'm thinking about whether I want her to grow up believing that love means accepting betrayal and assault. Grace was making hurry-up gestures from beside her car. They'd been talking for more than 5 minutes, and Grace's patience with Jonathan had never been extensive. I need time, Rebecca said finally. Time to heal, time to think, time to figure out what I want our daughter's life to look like. How much time? I don't know, maybe a lot. Maybe forever. Rebecca turned toward Grace's car, then paused. Jonathan, when you promised Vanessa you were going to leave me, did you mean it? The question hung in the air between them. Jonathan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was written all over his face. That's what I thought, Rebecca said quietly and walked away. As Grace drove them out of the hospital parking lot, Rebecca watched Jonathan in the side mirror, standing alone beside his expensive car. He looked lost and broken, and part of her felt sorry for him. But she felt sorrier for the woman she'd been yesterday, the woman who would have forgiven him anything rather than face the truth about her marriage. So what's the plan? Grace asked as they pulled into traffic. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's going to be my plan. Not Jonathan's, not his mother's, not even Michael's. Mine. Grace grinned. Now that's the Rebecca I remember from college. I was wondering when she was going to show up again. As they drove across town toward Grace's house, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of possibility. Her marriage might be over, her life might be in chaos, but for the first time in 8 months, she wasn't being lied to. And that, she was beginning to realize, was the first step toward building something real. Behind them, Michael followed in his police cruiser, keeping watch over his sister as she began the difficult journey toward her new life. Vanessa Cole was in custody, facing serious charges. Jonathan's reputation was destroyed, his business failing. The power in Rebecca's story had shifted completely. She was no longer the victim of other people's choices. She was the author of her own future. The phone records arrived on Michael's desk 3 days after Vanessa's arrest, and they told a story more sordid than he'd imagined. 8 months of constant communication between Jonathan and Vanessa, texts every few minutes during the day, hour-long phone calls late at night, even communications during weekends when Jonathan was supposedly spending quality time with his pregnant wife. Michael spread the documents across his desk, highlighting the most damning entries. February 14th, Valentine's Day, showed a 2-hour phone call between Jonathan and Vanessa, while Rebecca had posted on social media about her romantic dinner at home with her husband. March 22nd, the day after Rebecca's baby shower, Jonathan had sent Vanessa 47 text messages, including one that made Michael's blood boil. Can't wait until this pregnancy is over and things get back to normal. The hotel receipts were equally devastating. Jonathan had booked rooms at expensive hotels across the city, always for one night, always charged to his business account. The dates corresponded perfectly with the nights he'd told Rebecca he was working late or traveling for business. But it was the jewelry receipts that would destroy Jonathan completely in divorce court. $18,000 worth of jewelry purchased over 8 months. Diamond earrings, a sapphire necklace, a gold bracelet engraved with "Forever Yours." None of it had ever appeared in Rebecca's jewelry box. Michael was reviewing the evidence when Detective Rivera knocked on his office door. "The prosecutor wants to offer Vanessa Cole a plea deal," Rivera said, settling into the chair across from Michael's desk. "Assault in the second degree, 2 years probation, restraining order, community service." "What about attempted murder charges?" "Defense is claiming no intent to cause serious bodily harm. They're saying it was a heat-of-the-moment push that went wrong." Rivera shrugged. "Prosecutor thinks it's a solid deal. Guarantees conviction, saves the taxpayers money on a trial." Michael considered this. Part of him wanted to see Vanessa Cole face the harshest possible penalties for what she'd done to Rebecca. But Rebecca was 7 months pregnant and dealing with the collapse of her marriage. A long, drawn-out trial might be more trauma than she could handle. "I'll talk to my sister," Michael said finally. "It's her call." At Grace Coleman's house across town, Rebecca was discovering just how extensively her husband had been lying to her. Grace had helped her set up a laptop in the guest bedroom, and Rebecca was systematically going through 8 months of credit card statements, phone bills, and business expenses. The pattern was painfully clear. Every late night at the office corresponded with charges at expensive restaurants. Every business trip showed hotel bills for 2 people. Every gift Jonathan had supposedly bought for clients had actually been purchased for Vanessa. "Look at this," Rebecca said, pointing to a credit card statement from March. "The same day he bought me a $15 card for our anniversary, he spent $400 on dinner for 2 at that French place downtown." Grace peered over Rebecca's shoulder at the laptop screen. "What a piece of work. He was literally celebrating your anniversary with his mistress." Rebecca scrolled through more statements, each one revealing another layer of deception. Jonathan hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been living a double life, complete with romantic dinners, weekend getaways, and expensive gifts. Meanwhile, Rebecca had been making do with grocery store flowers and fast food dates because Jonathan claimed money was tight due to business expenses. 8 months, Rebecca said quietly. "I spent 8 months making excuses for him. 8 months telling myself he was just stressed about work, about the baby, about everything. I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid. You were trusting your husband, which is what you're supposed to do in a marriage. He's the one who betrayed that trust." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "Please call me. We need to talk about the baby's future." She deleted the message without responding. Jonathan had lost the right to make demands on her time and attention. Instead, she called Michael. "I want to see those phone records you mentioned, all of them." "Becca, I don't think that's a good idea. They're pretty brutal. I need to see them. I need to understand the full scope of what he was doing while I was planning our life together." Michael arrived an hour later with a thick folder of documents. He tried to prepare Rebecca for what she was going to see, but the reality was still devastating. Page after page of evidence that her marriage had been a complete fiction. The worst was a text exchange from the day of Rebecca's 20-week ultrasound, when they learned they were having a daughter. Jonathan to Vanessa. "Had to sit through ultrasound today. It's a girl." Vanessa to Jonathan. "Poor baby, stuck with such a boring mommy. Good thing she'll have us to show her how to really live." Jonathan to Vanessa. "Can't wait until this is all over and we can be together properly." Rebecca stared at the messages until the words blurred. While she'd been crying happy tears at seeing their daughter's face on the ultrasound screen, Jonathan had been complaining to his mistress about being there. While Rebecca had been imagining their future as a family, Jonathan had been planning a future that didn't include her. "I want to accept the plea deal," Rebecca said suddenly. Michael looked up from the documents he'd been organizing. "Are you sure? We could probably get attempted murder charges to stick." "I'm sure. I want this to be over so I can focus on building a new life for me and my daughter. I don't want to spend months in courtrooms reliving the worst day of my life." "What about Jonathan?" Rebecca's smile was cold. "Jonathan's about to discover that destroying someone's life has consequences. His business is failing, his reputation is ruined, and these phone records are going to ensure I get everything I'm entitled to in the divorce. Grace looked up from her own laptop, where she'd been researching divorce attorneys. Speaking of which, I found you a lawyer, Patricia Wells. She specializes in high-asset divorces involving infidelity. Her reviews are absolutely vicious. Perfect. Rebecca felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in months. Power. For 8 months, other people had been making decisions that affected her life. Jonathan deciding to have an affair. Vanessa deciding to get rid of the competition. Eleanor Hayes deciding Rebecca wasn't good enough for her son. Now Rebecca was taking control of her own story. The house phone rang, and Grace answered with her usual directness. Coleman Residence. A pause, then Grace's expression darkened. No, Eleanor. Rebecca is not available to speak with you. No, she's not being unreasonable. No, I will not give her your message about family loyalty and forgiveness. Grace hung up without saying goodbye. Jonathan's mother? Rebecca asked. Apparently she thinks you should forgive and forget for the sake of the family name. Also, she's planning to sue for grandparents' rights if you don't reconcile with Jonathan. Rebecca laughed, surprising herself. Of course she is, because this situation wasn't complicated enough already. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Rebecca, I wanted to check on how you're feeling. Are you experiencing any unusual pain or bleeding? No, everything seems normal. The baby's been very active today. Good. I also wanted to let you know that I've been reviewing your medical records, and I think there might be an opportunity for you when you're ready. My practice is expanding, and we're looking for someone to manage our patient education programs. It would be part-time initially, flexible hours, perfect for a new mother. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. A job offer, a chance to build her own career, her own financial independence. That sounds wonderful, Dr. Mitchell. I'd love to discuss it further. After she hung up, Grace was grinning at her. Look at you, already building your empire. It's just a part-time job. It's a start, and it's yours, not something Jonathan gave you or something you have to ask permission for. Grace closed her laptop. You know what? I think this might be the best thing that ever happened to you. Rebecca considered this as she felt her daughter kick against her ribs. 3 days ago, she would have said losing her marriage was the worst thing that could happen to her. But sitting in Grace's guest room, surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal, but also evidence of her own strength, Rebecca was beginning to think Grace might be right. She'd lost a husband who didn't love her and a marriage that was built on lies. But she'd found herself again. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. Outside, Michael sat in his car reviewing his notes from Vanessa's interrogation. Tomorrow, she would formally accept the plea deal. Jonathan would face the financial consequences of his choices, and Rebecca would begin building the life she deserved. Justice, Michael reflected, sometimes looked different than revenge. But it was still justice. The law offices of Patricia Wells occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city. Rebecca sat in a leather chair across from the woman who would handle her divorce, feeling intimidated and empowered in equal measure. Patricia Wells was exactly what Grace had promised. Sharp, efficient, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her client's interests. She was probably 55, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and a suit that probably cost more than Rebecca's car. I've reviewed the preliminary documents your brother provided, Patricia said, spreading files across her mahogany desk. Phone records, hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, business expenses. Your husband was remarkably careless about covering his tracks. He didn't think he needed to cover them, Rebecca replied. He thought I was too trusting to ever check. His mistake. These records show a clear pattern of marital misconduct spanning 8 months, with significant financial resources diverted from the marriage to support the affair. Patricia's smile was predatory. In this state, that translates to a very favorable settlement for you. Rebecca shifted in her chair as the baby kicked. What exactly does that mean? It means your husband is going to pay dearly for his choices. Community property division, spousal support, child support, and potentially punitive damages for emotional distress caused by the affair. Patricia consulted her notes. Hayes Construction is valued at approximately $12 million. Even with the recent stock decline following the scandal, You're looking at a substantial settlement. The numbers were staggering. Rebecca had never thought of herself as someone who cared about money, but facing single motherhood had clarified her priorities quickly. Financial security meant independence. Independence meant freedom. What about his mother? Grace mentioned something about grandparents' rights. Patricia's expression hardened. Eleanor Hayes has no legal standing for grandparents' rights in this state unless she can prove parental unfitness, which she cannot. It's an empty threat designed to pressure you into reconciliation. I'd advise you to ignore it completely. As if summoned by their conversation, Rebecca's phone rang. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen. Should I answer it? Rebecca asked. Only if you're prepared to hear more lies and manipulation, Patricia said bluntly. Nothing he says at this point can help your case, but it might hurt his. Rebecca let the call go to voicemail. Whatever Jonathan had to say, she wasn't ready to hear it. Across town, Jonathan sat in his office at Hayes Construction, watching his business empire crumble in real time. The scandal had cost him 3 major contracts, his stock price had dropped 60%, and his board of directors was demanding his resignation. His mother paced in front of his desk like a caged animal, her usual composure completely shattered. This is a disaster, Jonathan, an absolute disaster. Do you have any idea what this scandal is doing to our family's reputation? Our family's reputation? Jonathan looked up from the resignation letter he'd been drafting. Mother, I'm the one who had the affair. I'm the one who created this mess. Because you were weak and allowed yourself to be seduced by that calculating little tramp, Eleanor snapped. But Rebecca's being ridiculous about this whole situation. Women have been dealing with their husbands' infidelities for centuries. She needs to grow up and think about what's best for the family. Jonathan stared at his mother in amazement. Even now, even after everything that had happened, Eleanor couldn't accept that her son had done anything truly wrong. Rebecca was assaulted, Mother, pushed down a flight of stairs while she was carrying my child, by the woman I was having an affair with. How exactly is that Rebecca's fault? She was hysterical and confrontational. She created a volatile situation by showing up unannounced and making a scene. She brought me lunch. She was checking up on you because she's insecure and controlling. If she'd been a better wife, more attentive to your needs, you never would have strayed in the first place. The casual victim blaming made Jonathan feel sick. He'd always known his mother was controlling, but he'd never seen this level of cruelty from her before. You encouraged the affair, he said suddenly, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. You introduced me to Vanessa. You set up the situations where we'd be alone together. You wanted me to cheat on Rebecca. Eleanor's expression didn't change. I wanted you to realize that you'd married beneath yourself. Rebecca's a sweet girl, but she's not suitable for someone in your position. No family connections, no social standing, no understanding of what it means to be part of an established family. She's the mother of my child, and she'll always be part of your life because of that. But divorce doesn't have to mean disaster. You can provide for the child financially while building a more appropriate life with someone who understands your world. Jonathan stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward into the wall. Get out. Jonathan, you're being emotional. Get out of my office, get out of my building, and don't contact Rebecca again. Ever. Eleanor's mask of composure finally slipped. You're throwing away everything I've worked to build for this family. Everything your father built. For what? A woman who won't even take your phone calls? I'm throwing it away because I destroyed it myself. Because I listened to you instead of trusting my wife. Because I was too weak to stand up to you when it mattered. Jonathan walked to his office door and opened it. I said, get out! After Eleanor left, Jonathan sat alone in his office and tried to call Rebecca again. This time she answered, What do you want, Jonathan? Her voice was different, cooler, more controlled. The soft warmth that had drawn him to her in the first place was gone, replaced by something harder and more distant. I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just for the affair, but for everything. For letting my mother interfere in our marriage. For being weak and selfish and stupid. For putting you and the baby in danger. Okay, you've apologized. Rebecca, please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but can we at least try to work this out? For our daughter's sake? There was a long pause. Jonathan could hear voices in the background. Grace Coleman's laugh, the sound of papers rustling. Jonathan, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. When you promised Vanessa you were going to leave me, did you mean it? The question he'd been dreading. Jonathan closed his eyes, remembering those late-night conversations with Vanessa, the fantasy future they'd planned together, the promises he'd made while lying next to his sleeping wife. Yes, he whispered. I meant it. Thank you for being honest. Rebecca's voice was steady, but Jonathan could hear the pain beneath it. That's all I needed to know. Rebecca, wait! But she'd already hung up. Jonathan stared at his phone for a long time, then picked up the resignation letter he'd been writing. His signature looked shaky as he signed his name at the bottom. At Patricia Wells' office, Rebecca ended the call and looked at her divorce attorney with clear eyes. I want to proceed with filing papers, and she said, as quickly as possible. Patricia nodded approvingly. I'll have the initial documents ready by tomorrow morning. Full disclosure of assets, temporary support orders, custody arrangements. Your husband is about to learn that actions have consequences. As Rebecca left the law office, she felt lighter than she had in months. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. She no longer had to wonder if her marriage could be saved, if Jonathan really loved her, if she was fighting for something worth saving. The answer to all those questions was no, and finally accepting that was the first step toward building something better. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grace. How did it go with the lawyer? Rebecca typed back, Good, I'm ready to start my new life. And for the first time since she'd opened Jonathan's office door and seen him with Vanessa, Rebecca meant it completely. The Hayes family mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Rebecca had always felt uncomfortable in the imposing Tudor-style house with its dark wood paneling and formal furnishings. Tonight, sitting in the mahogany-paneled dining room for what she knew would be the last time, she felt like a stranger in a place that was supposed to be her second home. Eleanor Hayes presided over the dinner table like a queen holding court, her silver hair immaculate despite the family crisis that had consumed the past week. She'd insisted on this dinner, claiming they needed to discuss the family's future, now that the scandal had died down. Jonathan sat across from Rebecca, looking haggard and defeated. He'd resigned from Hayes Construction the day before, and his replacement was already restructuring the company to distance it from the scandal. Rebecca could see the weight of his choices in the slump of his shoulders and the dark circles under his eyes. I think we can all agree that this situation has gotten out of hand, Eleanor began, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon with surgical precision. What's done is done. The important thing now is minimizing the damage to the family. Rebecca set down her fork, her appetite completely gone. The damage to the family? The scandal, the media attention, the business losses? We need to present a united front and show the community that the Hayes family can weather this storm. Eleanor's smile was brittle, which means putting aside hurt feelings and focusing on what's best for everyone. And what exactly do you think is best for everyone? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew where this conversation was heading. Reconciliation, of course. Jonathan has learned from his mistakes. The other woman has been dealt with appropriately. There's no reason this marriage can't be stronger than ever. The casual dismissal of Vanessa's assault as being dealt with appropriately made Rebecca's blood boil. Vanessa tried to kill me and our baby. She was emotional and made a poor decision. People do stupid things when they're upset. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. The important thing is that you and the baby are fine. Jonathan finally spoke up. Mother, that's not what happened. Vanessa deliberately pushed Rebecca down those stairs. She could have been killed. You don't know what you're talking about, Eleanor snapped. You weren't even there. I've seen the security footage, Jonathan said quietly. Michael showed it to me yesterday. Rebecca looked at her husband in surprise. Michael hadn't mentioned showing the footage to Jonathan. It was horrible, Jonathan continued, his voice breaking slightly. Watching someone hurt you like that, knowing it was my fault for creating the situation. I can't unsee it, Rebecca. I can't pretend it wasn't as bad as it was. Shum. Eleanor's carefully controlled expression finally cracked. Of course Michael showed you that footage. He's been trying to turn you against your own family since the day you married his sister. Michael has been protecting his sister from people who want to hurt her, Jonathan said. surprising everyone at the table, including himself, which is what I should have been doing all along. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Rebecca watched this confrontation between mother and son with fascination and growing respect for Jonathan's newfound backbone. "You're throwing away everything we've built," Eleanor said, her voice rising for the first time in Rebecca's memory. "3 generations of Hayes family legacy, all because you can't control your wife's hysterics." "I'm not throwing anything away. You are." Jonathan stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You encouraged my affair because you wanted to destroy my marriage. You've spent 4 years undermining Rebecca because she doesn't come from the right family or have the right connections. You've poisoned our relationship from the beginning." Eleanor rose to face her son, her composure completely shattered now. "I protected you from making a mistake that would limit your potential. Rebecca is a lovely girl, but she's not equipped to be the wife of someone in your position. She doesn't understand the social obligations, the business connections, the sacrifices required." "What sacrifices?" Rebecca asked quietly. Eleanor turned to her with undisguised contempt. "The sacrifice of putting family legacy ahead of personal feelings. The sacrifice of maintaining appearances even when it's difficult. The sacrifice of understanding that sometimes personal desires must be set aside for the greater good." "You mean the sacrifice of accepting that my husband cheats on me so long as he's discreet about it?" "If necessary, yes." The brutally honest admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Rebecca had suspected this was Eleanor's attitude, but hearing it stated so baldly was still shocking. Jonathan stared at his mother in horror. "How can you say that? How can you think that's acceptable?" "Because I lived it," Eleanor snapped. "Your father had affairs throughout our marriage. I knew about them, tolerated them, and maintained our family's dignity and position despite them. That's what women in our social circle do." The revelation stunned both Jonathan and Rebecca into silence. Eleanor Hayes, the perfect society matron, had built her entire life around accepting and concealing her husband's infidelity. "And you wanted the same thing for Rebecca," Jonathan said slowly. "I wanted Rebecca to understand her role and fulfill it appropriately. Instead, she's chosen to destroy everything over a momentary indiscretion." Rebecca stood up carefully, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "This conversation is over." "Sit down," Eleanor commanded. "We're not finished discussing this." "Yes, we are." Rebecca's voice was steady and calm. "I understand now why you've always disliked me, Eleanor. It's not because I don't come from the right family or know the right people. It's because I won't accept being treated the way you were treated. You've spent 30 years convincing yourself that tolerating betrayal makes you strong, when really it just makes you a victim." Eleanor's face went white with rage. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home? This isn't my home anymore, and you're not my family." Rebecca turned to Jonathan, who was watching the confrontation with something approaching awe. "If you want to have a relationship with our daughter, you can contact my lawyer, but I won't expose her to this toxicity." As Rebecca walked out of the dining room, she could hear Eleanor's voice rising behind her. "You're making a terrible mistake, Rebecca. You'll never find anyone who can provide for you the way Jonathan can. You'll end up alone and struggling, and don't expect this family to help you." Jonathan's voice followed his mother's, clear and firm. "She won't be alone, and if you ever speak to her or about her that way again, you won't be welcome in my life or my daughter's life." Rebecca paused in the mansion's grand foyer, listening to Jonathan finally stand up to his mother. It was 4 years too late, but it was still something. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "How's dinner with the in-laws from hell?" Rebecca typed back, "Just ended it, on my way home." As she drove away from the Hayes mansion for the last time, Rebecca felt a profound sense of relief. The woman who had sat through countless uncomfortable dinners, trying to win Eleanor's approval, was gone forever. In her place was someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. Behind her in the mansion's dining room, Jonathan was still facing off with his mother, finally saying all the things he should have said years ago. It wouldn't save his marriage, that was beyond repair, but it might save his relationship with his daughter. And sometimes, Rebecca thought, as she drove through the night toward Grace's house and her new life, that was enough. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and camera crews when Rebecca arrived for Vanessa Cole's sentencing hearing. The case had captured public attention in a way that made Rebecca deeply uncomfortable. Pregnant wife versus husband's mistress was the kind of story that sold newspapers and drove website traffic. Michael walked beside her, his hand protectively on her elbow as they navigated through the crowd of journalists shouting questions. Rebecca kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut, following the advice Patricia Wells had drilled into her about media attention. Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed. Rebecca recognized several faces from Jonathan's office, employees who had witnessed Vanessa's dramatic arrest. Grace Coleman sat in the front row, radiating protective energy. Even Dr. Sarah Mitchell was there, showing support for her patient and friend. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, looking very different from the polished professional who had ruled Jonathan's office. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she wore a conservative navy suit that couldn't disguise the weight she'd lost during her weeks in custody. When she turned to scan the gallery, her eyes met Rebecca's for a brief moment before looking away. Jonathan entered the courtroom just as proceedings were about to begin, taking a seat in the back row. Rebecca could feel his presence behind her, but didn't turn around. Whatever he was feeling about this moment was between him and his conscience. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Martinez," the bailiff announced. Judge Martinez was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who had built a reputation for taking domestic violence cases seriously. She reviewed the plea agreement with careful attention before addressing Vanessa directly. "Ms. Cole, you have entered a plea of guilty to assault in the second degree. Before I accept this plea, I want to make sure you understand the consequences of your actions." Vanessa stood, her lawyer beside her. "Yes, Your Honor. You assaulted a pregnant woman, putting both mother and child at risk of serious injury or death. The victim was 7 months pregnant at the time of the attack. Do you understand the gravity of what you did?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vanessa repeated, though her voice was barely audible. Rebecca was called to give her victim impact statement. Walking to the front of the courtroom while 8 months pregnant was challenging, but she managed it with dignity. At the podium, she looked out at the packed gallery, then directly at Vanessa. "3 months ago, I was a woman who believed in the goodness of people," Rebecca began, her voice steady and clear. "I believed that marriage meant partnership, that trust was sacred, that people generally tried to do the right thing. Vanessa Cole changed all of that in the span of 30 seconds. Rebecca paused, feeling her daughter kick against her ribs as if offering encouragement. "When she pushed me down those stairs, she wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to eliminate what she saw as an obstacle to getting what she wanted. She was willing to risk the life of an innocent child to clear her path to my husband. That level of callousness, that complete disregard for human life, is something I'm still trying to understand." Vanessa was crying now, tears streaming down her face as Rebecca continued. "But I want the court to know that while Vanessa Cole broke my body that day, she didn't break my spirit. She didn't destroy my faith in my own worth or my ability to build a good life for my daughter. If anything, she forced me to find strength I didn't know I had." Rebecca turned to look directly at Vanessa. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying that anger would poison my life and my daughter's life. But forgiveness doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences. What you did was wrong, and other women need to know that this kind of violence won't be tolerated." The courtroom was completely silent as Rebecca returned to her seat. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling notes, caught up in the power of her words. Judge Martinez nodded approvingly before addressing Vanessa again. "Ms. Cole, you will serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You will have no contact with Mrs. Hayes or any member of her family for a period of 10 years. You will complete 200 hours of community service focused on domestic violence education, and you will attend anger management counseling for the duration of your probation." Vanessa's legs gave out, and she had to grab her lawyer's arm to keep from falling. 18 months was significantly longer than the probation-only sentence her attorney had been expecting. "Furthermore," Judge Martinez continued, "this court wants to send a clear message that violence against pregnant women will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Your actions could have resulted in the death of both mother and child. That you plea bargained down from attempted murder charges should be considered a mercy, not an expectation." As Vanessa was led away in handcuffs, she turned to look at Jonathan one last time. He met her gaze steadily but without sympathy. Whatever fantasy she'd been nursing about their relationship was finally definitively over. Outside the courthouse, the media circus was even more intense. Rebecca declined all interview requests, but Patricia Wells made a brief statement. Justice has been served today. Mrs. Hayes is focused on her health and preparing for the birth of her daughter. She asked for privacy during this difficult time. As they walked to Michael's car, Rebecca felt a sudden sharp pain across her lower back. She stopped walking, gripping Grace's arm tightly. "Rebecca?" Grace's voice was sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" Another pain, stronger this time. Rebecca's water broke in a rush, soaking her dress in the courthouse steps. "Oh," she said in surprise, "I think the baby's coming." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Michael drove like a man possessed, while Grace called Dr. Mitchell from the passenger seat. Rebecca labored in the back seat, trying to breathe through contractions that were coming fast and hard. "This baby doesn't want to wait," Dr. Mitchell said when they arrived at the hospital. "We're looking at a fast delivery." Rebecca was wheeled into a delivery room while Grace called Jonathan to let him know what was happening. He arrived just as Rebecca was entering the final stages of labor, his face white with panic and worry. "Can I?" he began, then stopped. Would you like me to stay?" Rebecca looked at him through the haze of pain and exhaustion. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the lies and betrayal and destroyed trust, this was still his daughter being born. "Stay," she said simply. Emma Grace Hayes entered the world at 11:47 p.m., 3 weeks early but perfectly healthy. She was tiny but fierce, with a powerful set of lungs and her father's dark hair. Rebecca held her daughter for the first time and felt a love so pure and overwhelming that it washed away every other emotion. Jonathan stood beside the hospital bed, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." "Yes, she is," Rebecca agreed, not looking away from Emma's scrunched little face. For a few moments they existed in a bubble of new parent wonder that transcended their broken marriage. This was their daughter, their shared creation, their joint responsibility for the next 18 years. Then Eleanor Hayes burst through the door without knocking, her voice imperious and demanding. "Where is my granddaughter? I want to see her immediately." The bubble burst. Rebecca instinctively pulled Emma closer to her chest, her protective instincts flaring. "You need to leave," Rebecca said quietly but firmly. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my son's child. I have every right to be here." "Nar." Jonathan stepped between his mother and the hospital bed. "No, you don't. Rebecca asked you to leave. I'm asking you to leave. Please go." Eleanor's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, indignation, rage. "You cannot keep me from my granddaughter." "Watch me," Rebecca said, reaching for the call button. "Security, please. I need someone removed from my room." When hospital security arrived to escort Eleanor out, she was still threatening lawsuits and making demands. Her voice echoed down the hallway until the elevator doors finally closed on her outrage. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said when she was gone. "I should have stopped her before she got in here." Rebecca looked down at Emma, who had slept peacefully through her grandmother's dramatic exit. "She's not welcome in our daughter's life, Jonathan. Not until she can treat me with basic respect." "I understand, and I agree." Jonathan pulled a chair closer to the bed, careful not to crowd Rebecca, but wanting to be near his daughter. "She's beautiful, Rebecca. Thank you." "For what?" "For carrying her safely, for protecting her, for being strong enough to survive everything that's happened." His voice broke slightly. "I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider letting me be part of her life? I know I destroyed our marriage, but I want to be a good father to her." Rebecca studied Jonathan's face. The weak, easily manipulated man she'd married was gone. In his place was someone who looked genuinely remorseful and determined to do better. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it might be enough to build a co-parenting relationship on. "We'll figure it out," she said finally. "But Jonathan, if you ever lie to me again, if you ever put her at risk the way you put me at risk, you'll lose all access to her. I won't give you a second chance to hurt this family." "I understand. And Rebecca, I meant what I said to my mother. She's not welcome in our daughter's life unless she changes completely. I won't let her poison Emma the way she poisoned our marriage. It was the closest thing to an apology Rebecca was likely to get from Jonathan, and surprisingly, it was enough. Not enough to rebuild their marriage. That was beyond repair. But enough to give Emma a chance at having both parents in her life. Grace appeared in the doorway with a massive bouquet of flowers and a gift bag that looked like it contained half of a baby store. "How are my girls doing?" she asked, beaming at the sight of Rebecca and Emma. "We're perfect," Rebecca said, and meant it. Michael arrived an hour later, still wearing his court clothes but carrying a teddy bear that was almost as big as the baby. He took one look at his niece and melted completely. "She's going to have every boy in school terrified of her uncle," he said, gently stroking Emma's tiny hand with one finger. As visiting hours ended and the room finally quieted, Rebecca lay in the hospital bed with Emma sleeping on her chest. Through the window, she could see the city lights stretching out into the distance. Somewhere out there, Vanessa Cole was beginning her jail sentence. Eleanor Hayes was probably plotting her next move. The media was writing stories about the dramatic conclusion to the courthouse assault case. But in this room, with her daughter safe in her arms and her brother and best friend keeping watch, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Her old life was over. Her marriage was finished. Her trust had been shattered and her sense of security destroyed. But her new life was just beginning, and it was going to be better than anything she'd lost. Emma stirred slightly and made a soft sound that might have been a sigh of contentment. Rebecca smiled and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "It's just you and me now, baby girl," she whispered. "And we're going to be just fine." 6 months later, Rebecca stood in the kitchen of her small 2-bedroom apartment, watching Emma kick happily in her bouncy seat while she prepared dinner. The apartment was nothing like the sprawling house she'd shared with Jonathan, but it was theirs, paid for with her settlement money and furnished with things she'd chosen herself. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. Patricia Wells had been as ruthlessly efficient as promised, securing Rebecca a settlement that included half of Hayes Construction's remaining assets, substantial spousal support, and a child support arrangement that would ensure Emma's financial security. Jonathan hadn't fought any of it. If anything, he seemed relieved to pay the price for his choices. "Someone's in a good mood today," Rebecca said to Emma, who was babbling and reaching for the colorful toys attached to her seat. At 6 months old, Emma was already showing signs of her father's determination and her mother's sunny disposition. She was curious about everything, fearless in her explorations, and had wrapped every adult in her life completely around her tiny finger. The apartment door opened, and Grace Coleman entered with her usual lack of ceremony, carrying grocery bags and talking before she was fully inside. "I brought dinner from that Thai place you like, plus formula and diapers, because I noticed you were running low. Also, Michael called to say he's bringing someone to meet Emma tonight, which sounds suspiciously like he wants us to meet his new girlfriend." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Michael has a girlfriend?" "Apparently. Her name is Sarah. She's a social worker, and according to him, she's really special." Grace set the bags on the counter and immediately went to Emma, who squealed with delight at seeing her honorary aunt. "Hello, gorgeous girl. Did you miss me?" Emma reached for Grace with both hands, and Grace scooped her up expertly. Rebecca marveled at how natural Grace was with the baby, considering she'd sworn for years that children weren't for her. "You know you don't have to bring us dinner 3 times a week," Rebecca said, unpacking the Thai food. "We're doing fine on our own." "I know you are, but I like taking care of my girls." Grace bounced Emma gently, making silly faces that sent the baby into giggles. "Besides, someone has to make sure you're eating actual meals and not just surviving on crackers and coffee." It was true that Rebecca sometimes forgot to take care of herself while she was focused on Emma. The transition to single motherhood had been challenging in ways she hadn't expected. Not the practical aspects. She'd always been organized and capable. But the emotional weight of being solely responsible for another human being was sometimes overwhelming. "How was your first day back at work?" Grace asked, settling into the rocking chair Rebecca had placed by the living room window. Rebecca had started her new job with Dr. Mitchell's practice the week before, working part-time as a patient education coordinator. It was perfect for her current situation: flexible hours, meaningful work, and a supportive environment. Emma spent her workdays with a wonderful nanny named Maria, who came highly recommended and spoke to her in Spanish while teaching her baby sign language. "Good. Really good, actually. I helped develop a new prenatal education program, and Dr. Mitchell wants me to present it at a conference next month. Rebecca felt a familiar flutter of pride and excitement when she talked about her work. It's strange having something that's completely mine again. You mean having an identity beyond Jonathan's wife? Exactly. Rebecca had been thinking about this a lot lately. How much of herself she'd lost during her marriage. How she'd gradually shrunk her ambitions and interests to fit into the role Eleanor Hayes had designed for her. I used to love my marketing job before I got married. I was good at it. But somehow I convinced myself that being a wife was more important than having a career. Jonathan convinced you of that, with help from his charming mother. Emma made an unhappy sound and began fussing. Grace passed her back to Rebecca, who settled into the comfortable routine of preparing a bottle. These moments of domestic normalcy still felt precious to her, evidence that she'd built something stable and good from the wreckage of her old life. The intercom buzzed and Michael's voice came through the speaker. "It's us." Rebecca buzzed him up, curious to meet this mysterious girlfriend. Michael had dated sporadically over the years, but he'd never brought anyone to meet the family before. Michael appeared at her door with a petite brunette who looked to be in her early 30s. She had kind eyes and an easy smile, and she didn't seem intimidated by the protective scrutiny she was receiving from both Rebecca and Grace. "Rebecca, Grace, this is Sarah Chen. Sarah, these are the two most important women in my life, and that little person trying to eat her own foot is my niece Emma." Sarah laughed, immediately putting everyone at ease. "She's beautiful, Rebecca. Michael talks about her constantly. I think he's shown her picture to half the police department." "He's completely besotted," Rebecca confirmed, passing Emma to her uncle, who immediately started making the ridiculous faces that never failed to entertain his niece. "So you're a social worker?" "I work with families in crisis, domestic violence, custody disputes, child welfare cases." Sarah's expression grew more serious. "Michael told me about what happened to you. I'm glad you and Emma are safe now." It was the perfect thing to say, acknowledging what Rebecca had been through without dwelling on it or asking for details. Rebecca liked her immediately. They settled around Rebecca's small dining table, sharing Thai food and getting to know each other. Sarah was intelligent, funny, and clearly crazy about Michael. More importantly, she treated Rebecca as an equal rather than as Michael's little sister who needed protecting. "Michael says you're going back to school," Sarah said, helping clear the dishes while Michael and Grace entertained Emma in the living room. "Part-time to get my MBA. Dr. Mitchell thinks I should consider starting my own consulting business eventually, working with medical practices on patient education and community outreach programs." Rebecca loaded plates into the dishwasher, still amazed that she had goals and ambitions again. "It seems impossible right now, but maybe in a few years." "Nothing's impossible. I went back to school when my daughter was 3. It was exhausting, but it was also the best thing I ever did for both of us." Rebecca looked up in surprise. "You have a daughter?" "Lily, she's 8 now. Her father and I divorced when she was 2. Sarah's expression was matter of fact. "Best decision I ever made, even though it was terrifying at the time." "Where is she tonight?" "Sleepover at her best friend's house. She's at that age where hanging out with mom's new boyfriend isn't nearly as interesting as discussing boys and makeup with her friends." Rebecca felt a warm flutter of connection. Sarah understood what it was like to rebuild your life as a single mother, to find strength you didn't know you had, to create a new definition of family. After Sarah and Michael left, Grace helped Rebecca get Emma ready for bed. It was their routine. Grace would come for dinner, help with the baby's bedtime routine, and then they'd sit together in the living room, talking about their days while Emma slept peacefully in her crib. "I like her," Grace said, settling onto the couch with a cup of tea. "Sarah, me too. She's good for Michael." "She's good for you too. It's nice to see you connecting with someone who gets it." Rebecca curled up in the rocking chair, her own cup of tea warming her hands. Through the window, she could see the city lights twinkling in the distance. 6 months ago, those lights had seemed threatening, evidence of a world that was too big and complicated for her to navigate alone. Now they looked like possibilities. "Grace, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think I'm doing the right thing? With Jonathan, I mean, letting him see Emma, trying to co-parent?" Grace considered this carefully. She'd been skeptical of Rebecca's decision to allow Jonathan regular visitation with Emma, particularly after Eleanor's continued attempts to interfere in their lives. "I think you're doing what you think is best for Emma, and I think you're strong enough now to protect her if Jonathan disappoints you again." It was true. The woman who had fallen down those courthouse stairs 9 months ago would have been too afraid to set boundaries, too desperate to keep the peace. But the woman sitting in this apartment had learned to trust her own judgment. Jonathan visited Emma every Tuesday evening and every other Saturday. He was tentative at first, clearly nervous about caring for such a small baby, but he was learning. More importantly, he never brought up reconciliation, never pressured Rebecca for more than she was willing to give, and never allowed his mother anywhere near their daughter. Eleanor had tried several times to force contact with Emma, showing up at Rebecca's apartment building and demanding to see her granddaughter. Each time, Rebecca had calmly refused and threatened to call the police if Eleanor didn't leave. The last attempt had been 2 months ago, and Rebecca hoped Eleanor had finally gotten the message. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Rebecca admitted, "for Jonathan to revert to his old patterns, or for Eleanor to cause more problems, or for something to go wrong with this new life I'm building. That's normal. You've been through trauma, and part of recovery is learning to trust that good things can last." Grace leaned forward. "But Rebecca, look around. Look at what you've built in 6 months. This apartment, your job, your independence, your relationship with Emma. You did all of that. You created this life." Rebecca looked around her small living room, at Emma's toys scattered on the floor, at the photos of her and Emma and Grace and Michael on the side table, at the stack of textbooks from her MBA program on the coffee table. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was real and it was hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "Emma was amazing today. Thank you for letting me take her to the park. Hope you both sleep well." Rebecca showed the message to Grace, who rolled her eyes but smiled. "Okay, I admit it. He's trying. He is, and that's enough for now." As Grace prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Rebecca, I'm proud of you. I know I don't say it enough, but I'm proud of the woman you've become. The woman you always were actually, but gotta show." After Grace left, Rebecca checked on Emma one more time before getting ready for bed herself. Her daughter slept peacefully, tiny fists curled beside her head, completely secure in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. Rebecca stood in the doorway of Emma's room, overwhelmed with gratitude for this small, perfect life they'd built together. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd once imagined, but it was real and strong and beautiful. And it was just the beginning. 1 year later, Rebecca stood at the podium in the courthouse where Vanessa Cole had been sentenced, addressing a room full of women at a domestic violence awareness conference. The same space that had once witnessed her trauma was now hosting her triumph. "A year and a half ago, I was a woman who believed that love meant accepting anything," Rebecca began, her voice clear and confident. "I believed that if I just tried harder, loved better, forgave more easily, I could fix the problems in my marriage. I was wrong." The audience was rapt, dozens of women who had their own stories of betrayal and recovery. Rebecca could see her own journey reflected in their faces. The pain, the confusion, the gradual awakening to their own strength. The woman who fell down those stairs was broken in more ways than just physically. She had lost herself so completely in trying to be the perfect wife that she'd forgotten who she was underneath all those expectations and compromises. Rebecca paused, her eyes finding Grace in the front row, holding 18-month-old Emma on her lap. Her daughter was babbling happily, completely unaware that her mother was speaking to a room full of strangers about the darkest period of their lives. But that broken woman was also stronger than she knew, stronger than anyone knew. And sometimes it takes falling down to discover that you can get back up. The speech was part of Rebecca's new role as a community outreach coordinator for the county's domestic violence prevention program. She'd started the position 3 months earlier, after completing her MBA and realizing that her experience could help other women navigate their own difficult journeys. Her consulting business was thriving too. She'd helped a dozen medical practices develop patient education programs, and Dr. Mitchell was talking about expanding their partnership to include other healthcare networks. Rebecca had business cards now, a professional website, and a reputation as someone who could translate complex medical information into accessible practical guidance. Most importantly, she had something she'd never possessed during her marriage: complete financial independence. After the conference, Rebecca drove across town to meet Jonathan at the park where he'd been taking Emma for their Saturday visits. It had become their routine. He would spend the morning with Emma, then Rebecca would join them for lunch before he returned their daughter to her. She found them by the duck pond, Jonathan pushing Emma in a stroller while she pointed excitedly at the water and chattered in her own developing language. At 18 months, Emma was walking, climbing, and getting into everything with the fearless curiosity that reminded Rebecca of her brother Michael. "Mama!" Emma squealed when she saw Rebecca approaching, reaching out with both arms to be picked up. Rebecca scooped up her daughter, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair and marveling as always at how perfectly Emma fit in her arms. "Did you have fun with Daddy?" "Duck! Duck!" Emma pointed toward the pond, where several mallards were swimming in lazy circles. "Yes, ducks. Very exciting." Rebecca looked at Jonathan, who was watching their interaction with the same mixture of love and regret he always wore during these handoffs. "How was she?" "Perfect, as always. She's starting to say more words. I think she said book when we were reading this morning." Jonathan had thrown himself into fatherhood with an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. He read parenting books, attended a Daddy and Me class, and had child-proofed his new apartment so thoroughly that it looked like a padded cell. He was trying to be the father he hadn't had himself, and the effort was genuine. They found a bench near the playground, Emma content to sit between them and watch other children playing. These moments were still awkward sometimes, but they were getting easier. Rebecca and Jonathan were learning to be co-parents rather than ex-spouses, focusing on Emma's needs rather than their own complicated history. "I saw the article about your speech today," Jonathan said carefully, "in the newspaper. It sounded powerful." Rebecca glanced at him in surprise. She hadn't expected him to follow her professional activities. "You read the community section?" "I read everything about you." He immediately looked embarrassed by the admission. "I mean, not in a stalking way. Just, I want to know how you're doing, how you're both doing." There was something different about Jonathan lately. He seemed more settled, less frantic with guilt and regret. Rebecca suspected he might be seeing someone, though he hadn't mentioned it. She hoped he was. Everyone deserved a chance at happiness, even people who had made terrible mistakes. "I'm doing well," she said simply. "We both are." "I can see that. You look—" He searched for the right word. "You look like yourself again, like the woman I fell in love with in college, before everything got complicated." It was the most personal thing he'd said to her in months, and Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond. She had forgiven Jonathan for the affair and the lies, but forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean going backward. "Jonathan," she began carefully. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know that ship has sailed. I destroyed our marriage and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. Your business, your advocacy work, the way you're raising Emma. You're an amazing mother and an impressive woman." Emma chose that moment to escape from the bench, toddling toward the playground with the determination of someone on an important mission. Rebecca and Jonathan followed, falling into the easy coordination of parents keeping their adventurous toddler safe. "Have you heard from your mother lately?" Rebecca asked as they watched Emma attempt to climb a structure designed for much older children. Jonathan's expression darkened. "No. I made it clear after Emma's first birthday that she's not welcome in our lives unless she can treat you with respect. She chose her position." Eleanor had made one final attempt to force a relationship with Emma by showing up at the baby's first birthday party uninvited. Rebecca had calmly asked her to leave, and when Eleanor refused, Jonathan had physically escorted his mother from Grace's house. They hadn't spoken since. "Do you miss her?" Rebecca asked. "I miss the mother I thought I had, but that woman never really existed. The real Eleanor Hayes cares more about social status than her own family's happiness." Jonathan helped Emma navigate down a small slide. "I won't let her poison Emma's life the way she poisoned ours." They spent another hour at the playground, taking turns chasing Emma and making sure she didn't attempt any death-defying climbs. Watching Jonathan with their daughter, Rebecca could see glimpses of the man she'd once fallen in love with. Gentle, attentive, genuinely caring. Those qualities had always been there, buried under his mother's expectations and his own insecurities. As they prepared to leave, Jonathan hesitated. "Rebecca, I know this might be inappropriate, but I wanted you to know that I've been seeing someone. A woman I met in my therapy group. I didn't want you to hear it from Emma or find out accidentally." Rebecca felt a flutter of something that might have been relief. "That's wonderful, Jonathan. I hope you're happy. We're taking it very slowly. She has a 7-year-old son, and we're both focused on making sure our kids are comfortable with everything." He paused. "I'd like Emma to meet her eventually if you're okay with that." The old Rebecca would have panicked at the thought of another woman in Emma's life. But the new Rebecca understood that more people loving her daughter was a gift, not a threat. "When you're both ready, we'll talk about it," she said. "Emma's fortunate to have so many people who care about her." As they walked back to their cars, Emma babbling happily in her stroller, Rebecca felt a sense of completion. Not the kind of fairy tale ending she'd once imagined, but something better. A real resolution that honored both their past and their separate futures. "Rebecca," Jonathan called as she was buckling Emma into her car seat. "Yes? Thank you for everything, for giving me a chance to be her father, for building such a good life for her, for being strong enough to save us all from the mess I created." His voice was thick with emotion. "I know I'll never deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it every day." Rebecca looked at him across the roof of her car, this man who had been her husband and was now something harder to define. "We all deserved better than what happened to us, Jonathan, but we all survived it too. That has to count for something." Driving home with Emma singing nonsense songs in the back seat, Rebecca reflected on how far they'd all come. Vanessa Cole was completing her jail sentence and would soon begin the long process of rebuilding her life. Eleanor Hayes was living alone in her mansion, surrounded by the social status she'd valued more than her family. Michael was planning to propose to Sarah, with Emma scheduled to be the flower girl. And Rebecca was living the life she'd never known she wanted. Independent, purposeful, surrounded by people who loved and respected her exactly as she was. That evening, as she put Emma to bed in their cozy apartment, Rebecca's phone rang. It was Michael. "How was the conference today?" he asked. "Good, really good. I think I'm getting better at the public speaking part." "Sarah says you're a natural." She was very impressed. Rebecca smiled, settling into the rocking chair beside Emma's crib. "I'm glad she was there. It means a lot to have family support." "Speaking of family support, Sarah and I have some news." "Please tell me you're not pregnant. I'm not ready to be an aunt and a sister to the same baby." Michael laughed. "No, nothing like that. We're getting married. Nothing fancy, just a small ceremony in her backyard. But we want Emma to be our flower girl." "Oh, Michael!" Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so happy for you both." "You approve? I adore her, and she's good for you. You both deserve this happiness." After they hung up, Rebecca sat in the quiet apartment, listening to Emma's soft breathing and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. 2 years ago, she'd been a different woman living a different life. That woman had been loved, but she hadn't been truly known. She'd been provided for, but she hadn't been valued. She'd been safe, but she hadn't been strong. Now she was all of those things. Loved, known, valued, safe, and strong. She'd built this life herself, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. Emma stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. Rebecca wondered what her daughter dreamed about at 18 months old. Ducks probably, and books, and all the people who loved her. "Sweet dreams, baby girl," Rebecca whispered, reaching through the crib slats to touch Emma's tiny hand. "Tomorrow's going to be another good day." And Rebecca believed it completely. Tomorrow would be good, and the day after that, and the day after that. Not because life was perfect, or because nothing bad would ever happen again, but because she'd learned the most important lesson of all: she could handle whatever came next. The fall from grace had become a rise to something better. And that, Rebecca knew, was the best kind of ending there was.